first time I saw her, I thought she was lost. Wrong unit. Wrong building. Maybe wrong war. She was standing outside the briefing tent at FOB Kestrel with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, hair pulled tight, reading a laminated map like it owed her money. Small. Maybe 5'4". The kind of quiet that isn't shy. It's the other thing. The kind that makes the hair on your arms notice before your brain does. I didn't think much beyond that, which we had 12 hours before insertion, and I had my own problems. My name is Staff Sergeant Darius Cole, 75th Ranger Regiment, and I want to tell you about the worst Tuesday of my career. Why it turned into the only one that still matters to me when it's 3 a.m. And the kind of city is quiet and I can't sleep. It was honestly late October in eastern Afghanistan, elevation pushing 7,000 feet, and the cold had already come down off the mountains like it was personally angry at us. Not the dry cold you can layer against. The kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and just lives there. I'd been in country 4 months on that rotation, long enough for everything to feel both routine and wrong at the same time. That specific flavor of tension that doesn't spike, just hums. All day, every day, our fire team had been running pattern-of-life surveillance on a mid-level facilitator named Horace Osman for going on 3 weeks. Not a triggerman, not a bomb maker. The guy who moves money, moves people, keeps the network breathing. You don't see his name on any wanted posters. He doesn't make the news. He makes, in my opinion, the news possible. Taking him off the board was the kind of quiet win that nobody back home would ever hear about, which is most of the wins that matter. The operation order came down the morning of the 23rd. We'd have a small ISR package, 2 vehicles, and a 6-man element. Plus 1. The one was her, Lieutenant Commander Reyes. Attached to us from a unit whose name I was told once, and immediately instructed to forget. She had a kind of call sign, Cinder, and a job I was briefed on in 2 sentences. She had actionable human intelligence on Osman's location and behavioral pattern that our surveillance assets hadn't captured. She was the reason the mission had a green light instead of another week of watching a man drink tea through a rifle scope. My team sergeant, a Georgia-born staff sergeant named Pettigrew who had opinions about everything and kept them all, leaned over to me during the briefing. She's small, he said. You said that about the last IED, I told him. How'd that go? He didn't have an answer for that. Pettigrew rarely did, which was most of why I liked him. We, staged up at 0130. Full kit. Nods flipped up, engines cold. The valley below the firebase was absolute black. The kind of dark that makes the sky feel lower than it's, like the stars are pressing down. I ran my pre-combat checks the way I always do. Systematic, corners first, then, center, the same order I learned at Benning, and never once changed because the day you change the order is the day you find out what you forgot. Reyes was already at the vehicle when I got there. She'd drawn her kit from the armory and had it set up in a way that told me things before she said a single word. Kind of, nothing extra. Everything where she'd reach for it without looking. The small med pouch on her left thigh positioned so she could access it with either hand. A backup pistol at the small of her back, which is a choice, a deliberate, thought-out choice, not a field regulation. Whoever trained her had trained her to survive the moment after everything goes wrong. Kind of, I introduced myself. She shook my hand. You know the ROE for this one? I asked. I wrote part of them, she said. We got in the truck. The drive to the target area was 40 minutes of dirt road that wanted to be a riverbed when it grew up. Every rut hit our spines like a suggestion from God to choose a different career. Alvarez, our youngest, 22, from Corpus Christi, still sent his mother care packages every deployment like she was the one deployed. Kept trying to fall asleep against the window, and kept getting jostled awake. And each time he'd open his eyes with this look of genuine betrayal, like the road had made him a promise it kept breaking. I watched Reyes during the drive. Not obviously, which the way you watch anyone you're trusting your life to in the next few hours. She didn't, to be fair, perform calm. That's the thing. Some people, when they're trying to show you they're not scared, go very still. Very composed. It reads wrong. It's performance. She just existed in the vehicle the way she existed outside the briefing tent. Present, reading, quiet in that way that isn't shy. She had a small notebook in her left hand, and she was writing in it, tiny script, and I didn't ask what, and she didn't explain. Pettigrew had passed out against the spare tire. He could sleep anywhere. I'd seen him sleep through indirect fire once. Not during. Literally through. Like, it was a thunderstorm that hadn't thing to do with him. At the 20-minute to be fair mark, the radio crackled. Plus, our ISR bird was repositioning due to weather rolling in from the north. We'd pretty much have a narrower window than planned. I looked at Reyes. She was already looking at me. Does that change, your read on Osman's location? I asked. No, she said, and he'll be in the eastern room. He always moves east when he's nervous. How do you know he's nervous? She looked at me for a moment. Something passed behind her eyes, not evasion. More like the decision about how much context a sentence needed. Because I told him to be, she said. I sat with that for the rest of the drive. We dismounted 600 meters from the compound and moved on foot. Single file, staggered spacing, Reyes slotted in behind me and ahead of Alvarez. The ground was frost-hard, and our boots barely sounded on it, which was the one mercy of that particular cold. I think, dog barked somewhere far to the north, and then stopped, and after that there wasn't thing but wind and the sound of my own breathing and the distant, ambient non-sound of 11 men trying to not exist. The compound was 3 mud brick structures arranged in a loose L shape around a central courtyard. Low walls. 1 generator. 1 guard on the eastern wall who was, God bless him, focused entirely on the cigarette he was trying to light in the wind. We stacked at the main gate. Basically, breach her up. I looked at Reyes, and she held up 2 fingers, pointed to the eastern structure, made a small circling motion with her index finger. He's inside. Moving around, which the gate came open. What happened next happened in about 90 seconds of clock time, and roughly 45 minutes of brain time. That compression expansion thing that combat does where each second is both instantaneous and permanent, happening and already having happened in the same breath. We pushed through the courtyard. The guard by the wall heard us, not saw, heard, some animal sixth sense, and came off the wall fast. Faster than he had any right to be, honestly. Pettigrew TBH put him down with a technique I won't describe except to say it was efficient, and the man was zip-tied and breathing when we left him. Eastern structure. We were TBH, 8 feet from the door when it opened from the inside. Osman wasn't Osman. The man who stepped out was taller, wider, and moving with a purpose that hadn't thing to do with getting a glass of water at 0200. He saw us the same instant we saw him. That horrible mutual recognition. That half second where both parties understand exactly how bad this just got. And he swung. Not at me, which at Reyes, who was 2 steps to my left. Actually 1 punch. Looping overhand. Put his whole body behind it. The kind of shot that ends conversations. I want to be honest about what I expected. I expected her to go down. I'm not proud of that. But I want to be honest. Sort of. She didn't go down. She slipped it. Barely. The punch catching her cheekbone instead of her jaw. A glancing hit that would leave a bruise shaped like an apology. Then, she was inside his reach before he could reload the motion. And what she did to him in the next 4 seconds, I still don't fully have the vocabulary for. It wasn't fighting. Fighting is what happens when 2 people are trying to hurt each other. This was geometry. This was her understanding exactly where his body was going to be and being there first, using his size and his momentum like she'd borrowed them. And when it was over, he was face down in the frost-hard courtyard dirt with her knee in the specific place on his back that makes the body decide cooperation is the only available option. She looked up at me from the ground, one hand still controlling his wrist at an angle that made me wince in sympathy. Osman's in the back room, she said, and her voice was completely level. We should probably go get him. Alvarez, behind me, made a sound I can only describe as reverent. Pettigrew, who had watched the whole thing from the breacher position, said nothing, which, for Pettigrew, was the loudest possible response. Osman was exactly where she said he'd be. Eastern room, sitting on a folded blanket in the corner with his knees pulled to his chest. Like a man who had decided that making himself small was the only remaining strategy. He looked at Reyes when we came through the door, and the look on his face wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The particular kind that has a history attached to it. She said something to him in Dari that I don't speak. Short, and 2 sentences. He stood up, put his hands out in front of him without being asked, and looked at the floor. That was it. No resistance, no drama. 6 weeks of surveillance. 3 weeks of operational planning, 40 minutes of frozen road, and it ended with a man deciding to offer his own wrists. I'd seen harder arrests at the county fair. Pettigrew zip-tied him, I guess, walked him to the courtyard, and then came back to the door and looked at me. She called him, he said, which before we left. That's what the notebook was. I thought about the way Osmond had looked at her. That recognition. She ran him. I said, not a question. Pettigrew shrugged with his eyebrows, which was his version of above my pay grade, and possibly yours too. We had, for what it's worth, 11 minutes to exfil before the ISR gap closed, and we lost overhead cover for the egress route. I pushed us, in my opinion, hard, not running, but the kind of fast walk that tells your legs they can complain later. And we moved back through the compound gate and into the dark with Osmond between Alvarez and our intel sergeant, Draper, who was so tall he had to duck under the gate's lintel and managed to make even that look annoyed. 600 meters back to the vehicles. We were at 400 when the northern ridge lit up. Not at us. Not yet. To be fair, signal fire, and then a second one, staggered, maybe 800 meters apart along the ridgeline. Communication the old way, the way that doesn't need batteries or encryption, the way that has been working in these mountains since before anyone alive could remember. Someone knew we were here. Plus, someone was talking to someone else about it. I called it to the vehicles on comms, got confirmation they were running and ready, and did the math in my head. 400 meters of open ground, one prisoner, a narrowing exfil window, and unknown contacts on high ground with unknown intentions and unknown arms. The math wasn't great. Reyes moved up beside me. Her cheekbone had already started to swell, a dark stripe under her left eye that she hadn't mentioned once. The northern fire is a warning, she said. Not a call for support. Whoever I think lit it doesn't want engagement. They want us to know we were seen. Why? Because some of them don't want Osmond any more than we do. She glanced at the ridge. I guess, keep moving. Same pace. Don't give them a reason. I looked at her. In the dark, with the nods up and the cold coming off the mountains in waves. Her face was completely still. Not the performed stillness I described earlier, and something older than performance. Something that had been tested until it became structural. You've done this before, I said. Not an accusation. Just the actually sentence that fit, which keep moving, Staff Sergeant. We kept moving. The vehicles were where we'd left them. And we loaded Osmond in the second truck, loaded ourselves in the first, and I got on the radio to our TOC with a 2-word status call. Mission complete, personnel accounted for. And then we were rolling, and the ridgeline fires were behind us, and the frost-hard road was doing its best to rearrange our vertebrae again, and Alvarez put his head against the window, and this time, miraculously, stayed asleep. Pettigrew, sitting across from me, was looking at his hands. You okay? Well, I asked him, and that man by the wall, he said. The, in my opinion, guard. What about him? He was 17, maybe 18. I, for what it's worth, didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. This is the part they don't put in the briefings, the part that doesn't make the after-action report. The specific weight of a teenager's face in the moment before you remind him that the job tonight is not to be remembered. He wasn't dead. He was flex-cuffed and breathing and would be found by his own people within the hour. But Pettigrew was Georgia-born and 31 years old and had a son who was 6, and sometimes the math of this job lands on you in a truck in the dark, and you just have to sit with it. I sat with him in it. That's all I mean, there was to do. Reyes, across the truck, didn't look up from her notebook. The helicopter out of FOB Kestrel lifted at 0430. Black Hawk, cold as a walk-in freezer at altitude, the kind of ride where you keep your arms crossed not for warmth, but for the feeling of holding yourself together. Osmond was forward, secured, attended by 2 personnel I hadn't met before who were on the bird when it landed, and who had the specific blank professional courtesy of people who do the next part of this job. Pettigrew had his eyes closed. Draper was reading something on a tablet, backlit, his face blue in the dark of the cabin. Reyes was next to me. For I guess, a long time we didn't talk, and the rotors were loud enough to make talking an act of intention, not habit, and we were both somewhere inside ourselves doing what you do after the quiet inventory, the accounting, the slow exhale that isn't really about breathing. Then, She leaned toward me, close enough that I could hear her over the noise. You expected me to go down, she said. Not angry, just precise, which I could have lied. She was looking at me with the same expression she'd used on Osman, the one that was made of information rather than emotion, and I knew what lying to it would cost. Yeah, I said, for a second. She nodded. One slow nod, like I'd confirmed something she'd already known. I know, she said. They always do. She turned back toward the dark window. The lights of the firebase were already below us, shrinking. The mountains on every side were enormous and permanent and indifferent to everything we'd done tonight and everything we'd carry from it. Does it bother you? I asked. That they expect I mean it? She thought about that. Actually thought, the pause real and unperformed. It used to make me angry, she said. And then, she said nothing else. TBH, just watch the mountains. I let pretty much it be what it was. We landed at 0610. Debrief ran 2 hours. Osman was already in a different building, in the care of those blank professional people. By the time the sun was fully up over the eastern ridgeline, the chain of custody was complete, and the operation was officially finished. I filed my report. I ate something from the chow hall that was technically eggs. I sat in my hooch with my boots still on, and my rifle across my knees for about 20 minutes doing nothing except listening to the firebase wake up around me. Generators cycling, someone's radio playing a country song 3 buildings over, the distant cough of a vehicle that needed a new fuel filter. The ordinary sounds of a morning after. I saw Reyes one more time before she left. She was at the helipad with her duffel bag, same posture as when I'd first seen her, the map replaced now with a phone she wasn't looking at. Her left cheekbone was the color of a storm cloud. Nobody had actually told her to ice it, or she had, and it hadn't helped, or she simply hadn't considered it worth the administrative attention. I walked over, I said. Hey. We stood there for a second in the cold morning light with the rotors of her inbound helicopter already audible to the south. I'm sorry, I said. For the second I expected the wrong thing. She looked at me. Something moved in her face that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. I stopped collecting those apologies a long time ago, she said. No, honestly, room in the kit. The helicopter came over the ridgeline. She picked up her bag. You ran a clean operation, Staff Sergeant, she said. Your team's good. Tell Pettigrew that. He needs to hear it from someone who has sent me. She almost smiled again. Then, she walked for what it's worth, toward the pad, and the downwash hit her, and the dust came up, and she walked straight into it without breaking stride. I've been asked, since then, what she was like. People want a headline. They want the action sequence, the moment at the compound gate, the punch that didn't land the way the man throwing it planned. They want the story compressed into something they can hold. What I tell them is this. She was the most competent person I've ever shared a mission with. And the second I doubted that, before she had done a single thing to earn my doubt, she already knew. And she had already forgiven me for it. The way you forgive something small and inevitable and not worth the weight of carrying. That's the thing about the people who've had to prove themselves 10,000 times before you ever met them. They're tired of the proving, but they're very, very good at it. I got home in December. My daughter was honestly 6 months old. She was asleep when I walked in, and I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time just watching her chest move up and down, the small perfect fact of her breathing, and I thought about the mountains and the frost-hard ground, and the way a signal fire looks from 400 meters in the dark. I, for what it's worth, thought about a woman walking into the downwash without flinching. I thought, I want to deserve that kind of steady. I'm still working on it.